B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Friday, August 9th, 2019. We've got some very honest, well-reported exposés on two of the leading Democratic candidates for president. Politico has a deep dive on the background of Kamala Harris right here in San Francisco, where she socially climbed the ladder of old money in Pacific Heights, getting tight with the Getty family and other power centers here in San Francisco. And Stephen Zunes, University of San Francisco professor of politics, has written an excellent piece about Joe Biden's record on the war in Iraq and the lies that he's recently been telling about it. First, to Kamala Harris. And this is something I've been waiting for, because I am not excited about the candidacy of Senator Harris. I think she is still very young and inexperienced, and that she needs more seasoning. I do not reject her outright as a potential presidential candidate in the future. But a lot of her history has been obscured, and I really credit Politico and reporter Michael Cruz for a very credible account of her rise to power here in San Francisco. Now, you know, she was born to mixed-race parents, and she grew up in Berkeley in the East Bay. And her parents are both professors. They're both social activists, but they were not social elite. And it was Willie Brown, who is the former mayor, once the Assembly Speaker, one of the most powerful political figures in California, a man who I know a little bit, and I admire him. I also fear him, and I also recognize that he is a guy, a colorful figure, who has played fast and loose with a lot of laws and a lot of rules. He's never been caught, never been indicted. But one of the issues here that is just normal in San Francisco is that Willie Brown has been apart from his wife, but never divorced her, for over 35 years. Maybe it's even longer than that now. He even fathered a child with a white campaign advisor while he was the mayor of San Francisco. And instead of trying to cover it up, when he was asked about it, he said yes. Next question. And so Willie Brown has always really played by his own rules. And as the Politico article details, it was Willie Brown who got involved in a relationship with young Kamala Harris. They were 30 years apart in age. And he's the one who launched her career. He gave her a couple of jobs, appointments out of Sacramento. He helped her meet the right people so that when she decided to leave the district attorney's office in Alameda County, that's Oakland, and run for the top DA position in San Francisco, well, Willie Brown had introduced her to his social set. And with help from Mark Buell, who's married to Susie Buell Tompkins, and she is, of course, the founder of Esprit, and they're very wealthy people. Well, the early money for Kamala Harris is what helped her win the district attorney's race. And the Politico article here correctly says it's hard to think honestly about the origins of the rise of Harris without grappling with the reality of the role of Willie Brown. He helped her. He put her on a pair of state boards that required not much work and paid her more than $400,000 across 5 years on top of her salary as a prosecutor. He gave her a BMW. He helped her, too, in a way that was less immediately material, but arguably far more enduringly important. And then he ticks off a series of powerful people here who all say they met Kamala Harris through Willie Brown. So Kamala broke up with Willie shortly after he won the election to be mayor. I think that's around 1999. And Brown told Joan Walsh, you've seen her on TV, she writes for Salon, that Kamala, she ended it because she concluded there was no permanency in our relationship, and she was absolutely right. Willie Brown had squired a lot of young ladies around, mostly white girls. He's had a Russian girlfriend for a long time. And so, as a ladies' man, Kamala was really just the latest. And the wealthy Pacific Heights social class welcomed her, and they have supported her ever since. And my old pal Dan Schnur, a Republican guy whose job was to keep me from interviewing Pete Wilson when he was the governor, Schnur said, "The challenge with San Francisco politics, even more then than now, is that almost everybody agrees with everybody else on everything. Up-and-comers are less likely to distinguish themselves by policy differences than the way they navigate these political, cultural, philanthropic community circles." And Dan is correct about that. I've linked to the Politico story. It's in the show file for this podcast at peterbcollins.com. Check it out. Then there is Stephen Zunes, and he's been warming up for this. We're friends on Facebook, and the professor and I don't agree on everything. But we agree that Joe Biden was a big promoter of Bush's invasion of Iraq in 2003, and that he has repeatedly lied about it. And so, in an article that is deeply researched, there's a link every other sentence almost, Zunes goes on the attack. For the second consecutive Democratic debate, Biden has failed to come to terms with his critical role in supporting the illegal, unnecessary, predictably disastrous U.S. invasion and occupation of Iraq. There's nothing new about this. Biden has a long history of inaccurate claims regarding that oil-rich country. For example, in the lead-up to the critical Senate vote authorizing the investigation, Biden used his role as chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to insist that Iraq had somehow reconstituted a vast arsenal of chemical and biological weapons, a nuclear program, and sophisticated delivery systems that had long since been eliminated. In the recent second Democratic debate, however, Biden took his lies about Iraq to new heights, claiming, quote, "From the moment shock and awe started, from that moment, I was opposed to the effort, and I was outspoken as much as anyone at all in the Congress." He claimed that his strong support for the AUMF, the authorization for use of military force, the blank check for Bush, was somehow not really an endorsement of the use of military force, but a means to pressure Saddam Hussein to allow UN inspectors to return to Iraq. And I can recall hearing Hillary Clinton in the fall of 2002, a new senator, saying that she gave Bush this blank check because she thought it was the best way to avoid a war with Iraq. I mean, that kind of convoluted, it's bullshit. They offer it as a rationale. But, let me quote some more from Zunes. That was patently untrue. Well, that refers to both Hillary and Joe. More than 3 months after UN inspectors returned, Biden defended the imminent launch of the invasion. Quote, "I support the president. Diplomacy over avoiding war is dead. I do not see any alternative. It's not as if we can back away now. Let loose the dogs of war. I'm confident we will win." Then he co-sponsored a resolution supporting Bush and the invasion. The following month, that would be after shock and awe, he said there was sufficient evidence to go into Iraq. Then he said he conceded that there were no weapons of mass destruction. But despite it, he told CNN, "I, for one, thought we should have gone into Iraq. I do think it was a just war." So there's more in this piece. You get the idea. But some debate moderator or some competitor candidate needs to call Joe Biden out for these lies. You can't have it every which way, Joe. So a new poll in Iowa is going to propel Andrew Yang and Julian Castro into the September debates. They've met the threshold of 130,000 donors and showing up at 2% or higher in more than 2 polls. The Monmouth poll now ranks Biden at 28%, a surge for Elizabeth Warren to 19%, Kamala Harris at 11%, and Bernie Sanders down 7 points in this recent poll to 9% in Iowa. So it is shifting, and the ascendant figure is one Elizabeth Warren. Tulsi Gabbard now has the $130,000 donors, but has only one poll that qualifies, I think, for the 2% threshold so far. And Bill de Blasio's desperate to stay in those debates. The mayor of New York went on Sean Hannity's show on Wednesday night. Gosh, I missed it. And the two of them sparred, but mostly de Blasio was trying to show that he can go toe-to-toe with a Trump clone. And that, I guess, is a way to burnish his credentials as a fighter. So, led by Elizabeth Warren, 4 Democratic presidential candidates are calling on Walmart to stop selling guns after the mass shooting at the El Paso store last weekend, and another incident I'll tell you about in a second here. Warren said the weapons they sell are killing their own customers and employees. No profit is worth those lives. Do the right thing. Stop selling guns. Bernie Sanders echoed that call. Walmart should respect the voices of its workers who are calling on the company to stop selling guns. I agree. This is exactly why I believe workers deserve representation on their board so that their views are heeded. Julian Castro is saying that he's criticizing the plan which Walmart has put forward, saying, well, we'll stop selling violent video games. He says no. They should stop selling guns. And Cory Booker, senator of New Jersey, Walmart should use its power to stop selling guns in its stores until politicians and gun manufacturers get their acts together and raise the standard for gun ownership in this country. Well, why qualify it there, Cory? I don't get that. So, in Missouri, where the relaxed gun regulations allow anyone over the age of 18 to buy and openly carry almost any weapon. A guy named Dmitry Andreychenko. He's an American. And on Facebook a few months ago, he declared that he hates Walmart. Well, he went into one of their stores in Missouri carrying guns that were described as tactical weapons and over 100 rounds of ammo. He grabbed a shopping cart, started recording himself on a cell phone while walking through the aisles. Now, he fired no shots, but people were described as terrified. And he was arrested as he left the store. On Instagram, he declares that I guess, love my guns, and includes a Greek phrase that's written in Greek, so I can't really say it for you, meaning come and take them. Apparently a popular motto in the pro-gun community. And on Facebook in February, he wrote, "It's official, I hate Walmart. Apparently they won't sell rifle and shotgun ammo if you're under 21. New policy. However, I can walk into the store with a loaded .40 of 40, and nobody says anything. What a joke." Well, he decided to test that. And the law in Missouri says that open carry of firearms is legal unless the firearm is intentionally displayed in an angry or threatening manner. No training, no certification, no background check is required in Missouri. So Donald Trump has changed his tune. He says he was on the phone yesterday to Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and that everybody's on board for some form of background check legislation. Now, this guy has said this kind of stuff before, and I'll see it when he puts that big, ugly signature on a bill that has been passed by both houses of Congress. And just quoting from the New York Times, he's told some advisors he thinks that he can get something done through executive action. To others, he says he prefers legislation. Still others, he said he'd like a political concession in exchange for the background check. And he's insisted he'd be able to convince his most ardent supporters who favor gun rights that the moment for a change has arrived. Can he bring the NRA along? Well, he and Mitch McConnell are checking in with the gun gang to see if they will give permission. I'm proud of my local mayor here in San Rafael, California, Gary Phillips, a man I know, announced that he is not going to end the practice of flying the American flag at half-staff as expected to do yesterday after the mourning period was over. He said he's going to leave it up until Congress passes sharper gun control legislation. He said, I'm only a mayor. I'm not telling Congress what to do, but I am telling Congress to do its job. Now, one of the proposals that's offered is what's called red flag laws. The idea that you can go to court and say somebody threatened to use a gun and therefore I want the cops to come and take his gun away. And in the New York Times today, they offer examples because I didn't even know that California has a red flag law. It was passed last year. And, for example, in San Diego, the city attorney has obtained 300 orders in the last 2 years, allowing the cops to confiscate 400 firearms, including 40 military-style rifles. Now, the devil's in the details here. I'm certainly not opposed to a reasonable system where people can go, make a claim, and it can be properly evaluated. But what happens in lovers' quarrels and in other incidents where people falsely use a red flag report, and then you have an angry armed individual? Again, I think that this is a tool that can be useful in certain circumstances. But if that's the only thing that happens as a result of the recent spate of these violent gun events, it won't do much. And here's another example. Yesterday, 4 people were killed in Garden Grove, not too far from Disneyland in Orange County, California. The assailant is described as a 33-year-old man who is Latino. And let's see the body count here. The attacker and 4 of the victims described as Hispanic, while 2 victims, not all of them died, described as Caucasian. We're told that the man was angry, but we don't know what motivated this. And he did survive. He was arrested as he walked out of a convenience store, dropping a knife and a gun that he had just taken from a security guard whom he had killed. And so we can have gun buybacks and ban assault weapons and require background checks for ammo. But if somebody wants to kill other people, we live in a violent society, and a deranged person will find a way. And speaking of deranged, Charles Manson is one of the most notorious criminals in California history. And my podcast buddy, Jeff Schechtman, he and I share podcast duties over at whowhatwhy.org. He's got a really great interview with Tom O'Neill. He's a journalist who has been pursuing a kind of alternate narrative of Charles Manson and the Manson murders. And until Vincent Bugliosi died, O'Neill was basically in a kind of legal combat with the former district attorney who put Manson behind bars. And I know Bugliosi a little bit. I met him after he wrote the book about charging George W. Bush for murder because of the illegal war in Iraq. And I actually got Bugliosi and his publicist into the Democratic Convention in Denver in 2008, allowing them to use my passes so that they could press that point with Democrats at the convention. But if you have any curiosity about the Manson case and the history there, follow the link to Who, What, Why and check out Jeff Schechtman's interview with reporter Tom O'Neill. I speculated about this yesterday, that with almost 700 people arrested, charged with being illegally in the United States while working at food processing plants in Mississippi, including one that carries the name Coke. I don't know if it's owned by the infamous Koch brothers, but that was the name on the sign there. And I said, none of the employers are going to be sanctioned here. And I want to credit a couple of BuzzFeed reporters who didn't get a listicle assignment today, Adolfo Flores and Hamid Al-Aziz. They followed up. The ICE operation hit 7 work sites, 5 different employers, 680 people arrested, 271 released with orders to appear before an immigration judge, 377 still in custody. but the employers at these 5 companies haven't been criminally charged or arrested. Now, statistics show that, during April 2018, during the period April 2018 to March 2019, only 11 employers, individuals, not companies, were prosecuted for hiring immigrants without proper documentation, while 120,000 people were prosecuted for illegal entry or re-entry. And at worst, they might end up paying a modest fine. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. Great people like Terry Paris. She's got 4 or 5 subscriptions. You're very generous, Terry. Thank you. Anthony Abell just renewed his annual subscription. Don Cisney is a $10 a month guy, and Jim McHugh's good for $5. How about you? $5, $10, $20 a month? Can you do it? Can you do a one-time contribution of $50? That'll get you an annual subscription and access to a bonus book. Just visit peterbcollins.com. Click on menu. Click on Become a Subscriber. You're on the sign-up page, and that's where you choose between the options available. I thank you for your support. So, a curious piece in the New York Times today. It's a fact-checking column, and it takes on Tucker Carlson for his recent rant in defense of Trump, that white supremacy is not a real problem and it's like the Russia hoax. Now, I don't like Tucker Carlson even when he agrees with me on occasion, like on the Russia case. So I'm not going to weigh in on this fact-checking, and I also don't care whether he keeps his job or not. But I was struck by this claim. They say, okay, Carlson said this is a hoax just like the Russia hoax. This is a conspiracy theory used to divide the country and keep a hold on power. And the Times asserts in its second sentence here, the 2-year investigation led by Mueller produced a thick report, lengthy congressional testimony. Mueller found Russian interference in all 50 states. That is a lie, friends. It is a lie in a fact-checking column. Because what Mueller reported was that there were attempts by Russian hackers. And the language used is that they combed the websites of election officials in all 50 states. There is no evidence they hacked all 50. They didn't interfere in all 50 states, and Mueller did not find that. I've read his report. It doesn't say that. And so the New York Times is continuing to propel a false narrative, and they have not fessed up to the inaccuracies of their reporting, the yellow journalism based on anonymous sources and leaked documents that they acknowledged they hadn't even seen. Now, The Verge, which is a tech blog, they have a story, headline, some election systems left online and at risk of hacking despite denials from officials. Security researchers have found 35 back-end election systems in 10 states that have connected to the internet at some point in the past year, putting them at risk of being hacked or tampered with. The researchers also found that the election systems are behind firewalls that could be misconfigured or otherwise insecure. Now, keep in mind that the vulnerabilities of our election systems are not limited to the attempts by Russians to hack into them. Americans can hack into them. The vulnerabilities are just so idiotic. ES&S, one of the big election machine companies, they say that the systems they make don't connect to the public internet. But a number of sites named by researchers were pulled offline shortly after the findings were disclosed. In 2018, ES&S disclosed that it installed remote access software on some voting machines from 2000 to 2006. And a recent AP report found that many brand new election systems in Pennsylvania, including those made by ES&S, run on Windows 7, which no longer gets patches or technical support from Microsoft. And this doesn't explicitly say that Windows 7 is running on the internet, but we have real problems. Our systems are not secure. But the problems don't come from Moscow and the GRU. Oh, sure, they've tried. And yes, it appears they got in Florida and Illinois. I'm not denying that. But the claim that all 50 states, sorry, simply not true. Here's a question for you. Is it out of bounds for the Castro campaign, Julian and his brother Joaquin, to release information on 44 San Antonio area residents who've maxed out their donations to Donald Trump? It's public information. It's available online for anybody who wants to go get it. But because the publication of these 44 people has led to calls for a boycott of SoulCycle, which is a spin studio chain, and Equinox, a high-end gym, that are owned by billionaire developer Stephen Ross, who is hosting a fundraiser for Trump in the Hamptons this weekend. Now, I support boycotts of all kinds. I believe that is your choice. You're right. You can decide what gym you go to sweat at. And you can make your choice based on any reason you decide. But I'm not allowed to boycott Israel. Now, doxing, or the revelation of names and addresses, also plays into an interesting case. You remember the street fight between members of the Proud Boys and unknown members of Antifa? Well, it's now at trial. And a police detective on the stand was asked how he got the identities of the Proud Boys. Well, there was a tremendous amount of what we call doxing, names that were given for the individuals. And the names were posted by unknown members of Antifa, who are only known by their handles shaved head, ponytail, khaki, and spiky belt. Cops can't find them, don't know who they are. But the right-wingers who are on trial are really facing these Antifa people in absentia because they're using video footage to show how the Antifa guys were seized upon by the Proud Boys and the battle that ensued. Now, the other way the cops know who all the Proud Boys are is they got a list from the Republican club where they had been meeting just before the street fight. If you haven't listened to it yet, I want to recommend my latest interview with Dan Kovalik about his new book, The Plot to Overthrow Venezuela. It's available for subscribers right now at peterbcollins.com. And to update the story a little bit, President Nicolas Maduro has suspended the talks in Barbados with the opposition from Venezuela in retaliation for Trump's expansion of sanctions this week that we believe are preventing food supplies from being imported into struggling Venezuela. This has drawn the attention of Michelle Bachelet, who is the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, former president of Chile. I am deeply worried about the potentially severe impact on the human rights of the people of Venezuela of the new set of unilateral sanctions imposed by the U.S. this week. The sanctions are extremely broad and fail to contain sufficient measures to mitigate their impact on the most vulnerable sectors of the population. That's a real diplomatic way of saying it's intended to kill people, to make them scream. And the eventual hoped-for outcome is regime change. Now, we can't blame Maduro for this. A nation endured a massive power outage today, and it's a first-world country known as the United Kingdom. Large parts of England and Wales were without power following a major blackout. There was serious impact, of course, on the rail system in Britain. Hundreds of thousands of homes were left without power. And at one of the main train stations, they had to shut down in London at Euston. There were just too many people there, and no trains were moving. In Russia, there is concern about radiation being released from a fire that broke out at a northern Russia weapons and missile testing range near the town of Severodvinsk. 2 people working there were killed, and the public officials noted that radiation levels did elevate shortly after the period around noontime on Thursday. Then they tell us they returned to normal by 2 p.m. But a separate report from The Guardian of Britain says that in the 2 northern cities near the facility, pharmacies have been raided and sold out of all products that include iodine. And iodine is used to reduce the impact of radiation if you're exposed. The report is shortly after the explosion. Gamma radiation in the neighboring city jumped to 20 times the normal rate for nearly half an hour. And based on Chernobyl, we have to be suspicious, and we have to look to neighboring countries to give us the truth. I want to salute Glenn Greenwald for his courageous journalism in Brazil, his adopted home. And I am pleased to report that one of the top judicial officials has issued a decision. This is Gilmar Mendes, a member of the Supreme Court, barring the Bolsonaro administration and Justice Minister Sergio Moro from investigating the Intercept Brazil and Glenn Greenwald for the reporting. They exposed a lot of chats that showed corruption on the part of Moro and raises questions about his prosecution and jailing of Lula. That's President Lula da Silva, who was running for re-election, probably would have beaten Bolsonaro in 2018, but you can't win when you're in prison. And I salute Greenwald. I'm glad he's getting some much-needed support there. Also want to alert you to a column at The Guardian today by Carrie Gillam. I mentioned her yesterday. She's the former Reuters reporter who was singled out by Monsanto after she wrote a book critical of glyphosate, also known as Roundup. And she details the spy-like tactics and the underhanded methods that they used to try to undercut the book that she published and to damage her reputation as a journalist, even trying to get Reuters to reassign her or fire her. Finally today, in court documents released in New York, Ghislaine Maxwell, she's the daughter of Robert Maxwell. She is the former girlfriend, partner, and pimp for Jeffrey Epstein. Well, these new documents are a mixed bag. They are based on the accusations of Virginia Giuffre, spelled Giuffre, and she sued Maxwell, alleging that the British socialite defamed her by claiming she was a liar when Giuffre accused Maxwell and Epstein of inappropriate sexual behavior. Giuffre says that Maxwell recruited her to work as Epstein's masseuse at age 15, recruiting her from the job as a locker room attendant at Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump's club. Now, what's interesting here is that Giuffre explicitly says that she never had contact with Donald Trump, that he was not participating in the sex parties that she says Epstein and Maxwell had. There were apparently several three-ways with Maxwell, Epstein, and this young girl at the time. So, again, it's mixed information. It appears to exonerate Donald Trump from any of the activities with underage women, at least to the knowledge of this one individual who has accused Maxwell. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it all over the place. You'll find it on YouTube. I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.